They broke my confidence slowly, but why am I the one they depend on now? The slow erosion of self-belief is a quiet kind of violence, leaving you a shadow of who you were. I'm Ethan, 35, and for years, the people I trusted most systematically broke my confidence until I believed I was entirely worthless. My story begins in the world of architectural design, where creativity is currency and confidence is the shield. I met Leo, 42, and Victor, 40, fresh out of university. They were brilliant, established, and seemingly willing to mentor me. We formed a small, ambitious firm, Vanguard Collective. I was the visionary, the one with the bold, unconventional concepts. They were the pragmatic, experienced faces who brought the projects to life. But soon, the mentorship turned toxic. Every original idea I presented was met not with enthusiasm, but with meticulous, demoralizing critique. Leo was the master of the dismissive sigh, the rolling of the eyes that implied my suggestion was childish. Victor specialized in the backhanded compliment, praising my effort while subtly pointing out the immaturity of the execution. It was never outright cruelty, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. They would take my concepts, refine them just enough to make them theirs, and then publicly minimize my contribution. They convinced me that my creativity was too erratic, too risky, and that without their steady hand, I would fail spectacularly. They didn't just break my confidence, they installed a persistent echo chamber of doubt in my mind. Every line I drew, every idea I conceived, was immediately vetoed by the internalized voice of Leo's scoff or Victor's gentle critique. I stopped presenting my best work. I accepted the role of the reliable, efficient support staff, the one who handled the logistics, the zoning codes, and the budgeting, the necessary, unglamorous cog. The pervasive life lesson they taught me was this: talent without confidence is merely a tool for someone else's ambition. They needed me small, compliant, and insecure to feel safe in their own mediocrity. I finally left the firm when I was 30. I didn't leave with a bang, just a whimper. I simply resigned, exhausted and utterly convinced that I was incapable of true creative leadership. I retreated into the safest corner of my profession, compliance consulting, a world of rules and predictability. The next 5 years were spent in emotional reconstruction. I worked in solitude, analyzing building codes and drafting tedious, perfect regulatory reports. It was boring, but it was safe. It was the antithesis of the chaotic, ambitious world of Vanguard Collective. The only thing I saved from my collapse was my meticulousness. The trait they used to pigeonhole me, my obsession with detail, became my anchor. I became known in the industry not for bold design, but for absolute, uncompromising precision. I never made mistakes. My compliance reports were flawless, my knowledge of regulatory nuance encyclopedic. I was, ironically, the person every major architectural firm secretly relied on to keep their risk exposure at zero. I built a successful, small consulting practice, Nexus Compliance, with clients across the country. I was financially secure, professionally respected, and emotionally untouched. My greatest victory was quiet self-sufficiency. All the while, Vanguard Collective soared. With my conceptual ideas and meticulous groundwork already laid, Leo and Victor leveraged their network and confidence into national recognition, winning major contracts based on the bold, signature style they had largely stolen from my early work. They were celebrated, featured in magazines, and living the professional life I had once dreamed of. I was safe, but they were soaring. The contrast was a daily reminder of the ambition I had sacrificed. If you achieved quiet, stable success after fleeing a toxic environment, would you feel true peace, or would the public, dramatic success of your former tormentors still cause a nagging ache of regret? The architecture world is built on confidence, but it runs on liability. Leo and Victor, for all their charisma, were fundamentally careless. They lacked the patience for detail. They thrived on the spectacle of the concept, but despised the tedium of execution. Their implosion started not with a dramatic failure, but with a series of tiny, cumulative, regulatory errors. They began cutting corners on compliance to speed up construction and increase margins, believing their reputation would shield them. The crisis hit when a massive, high-profile commercial tower they designed, the cornerstone of their legacy, was flagged by the city for a critical, foundational zoning violation. It wasn't a design flaw, it was a paperwork flaw, a simple misinterpretation of a complex variance code that I would have spotted in 30 seconds. The project was immediately halted. The financial penalties were crippling. Their firm, built on high leverage and public perception, began to crumble. Lawsuits mounted from clients, investors, and the city. The news was everywhere. Vanguard Collective, the darlings of the industry, were now facing total professional extinction. The irony was palpable. They were sinking because of the very precision and due diligence they had always mocked in me. The call came on a chilly Tuesday morning. It wasn't a social call. It was Leo, his voice stripped bare of its usual condescension, replaced by raw, desperate panic. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He knew exactly what I did and how good I was. Ethan, he started, his voice cracking. We need the best. The lawyers say this can only be salvaged if someone can find the loophole, the one regulatory avenue the city overlooked. We need Nexus Compliance. We need you. The request wasn't an olive branch. It was a frantic demand for the tool they had thrown away. The people who had convinced me I was only fit for the shadows now needed the precision I had honed in that very darkness to save their light. I agreed to meet them. I walked back into the office that once broke me, not as the timid intern, but as the only life raft in their professional hurricane. Victor was there, his usual sharp elegance replaced by exhaustion and fear. They looked old, broken, and small. They laid out the technical disaster. Years of overlooked documentation, 3 separate, compounding zoning errors, and a complete failure to anticipate a landmark preservation clause. It was a masterpiece of carelessness. They spent 20 minutes detailing the disaster, ending with the plea, "We know you hate us, Ethan. But if anyone can fix this, it's the person who knows the codes better than the people who wrote them. If the firm goes down, we lose everything." That was the deepest cut. They admitted that my specialized, boring skill was superior to their celebrated, visible genius. The true lesson crystallized. The ultimate revenge is not achieving higher success, it is cultivating the specific, necessary competence that your abuser lacks and eventually requires for survival. I didn't let emotion cloud my judgment. I approached the disaster clinically, with the cold precision of a surgeon. I spent 3 days meticulously combing through thousands of pages of municipal code, legal precedents, and construction history, the work they had always dismissed as grunt labor. I realized that my self-imposed exile in compliance consulting had prepared me for this exact moment. I was perfectly positioned in the void they had created. I found the loophole. It was obscure, complex, and hinged on a 1980s amendment regarding environmental impact assessments, a clause so tedious Leo and Victor would have laughed it out of the room 5 years ago. It required a specific, meticulous refiling and a niche court appeal, a process that only my firm could execute flawlessly. When I presented the solution, they didn't look grateful, they looked terrified. The solution was brilliant, but it meant ceding all control to me for the next 6 months. I gave them my terms. I didn't ask for a massive fee. I asked for something far more valuable. First, Leo and Victor had to sign a contract publicly acknowledging Nexus Compliance as the sole entity capable of salvaging the project, complete with a detailed explanation of the complexity only my firm could navigate. Second, they had to grant me full, non-negotiable creative and operational oversight of the project's regulatory design and future compliance for 1 year. They had to put their trust entirely in the hands of the person whose ideas they had once scorned. Third, and most importantly, I demanded a full, written, notarized statement detailing the true timeline of my contributions to Vanguard Collective's early success, acknowledging my original conceptual work that fueled their first 5 years. They had to restore the narrative they had spent years erasing. They fought the third point the hardest. It wasn't the money, it was the public admission of theft and incompetence. It was the forced swallowing of their own pride. But the alternative was total ruin. They signed. If the people who broke your confidence finally agreed to your terms, even if those terms were purely about regaining the truth of your worth, would you feel triumphant or simply empty? I saved them. My firm executed the plan flawlessly. The injunction was lifted, the zoning appeal won, and the project was allowed to continue. Vanguard Collective was financially wounded, but they survived. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound, exhausting peace. I realized that my peace didn't come from their survival, but from the fact that I had used the very qualities they broke to enforce my own truth. The true victory wasn't the legal one, it was the emotional one. I had reclaimed my narrative. The ultimate life lesson I took from this entire painful experience was this: the resilience you build in the shadow of someone else's malice is the only weapon truly needed for liberation. They may have broken your confidence, but in doing so, they forced you to build an unbreakable competence in the very corner they dismissed. I am still Ethan, 35, the meticulous consultant. But now, when I walk into a room, I don't feel the echo of their doubt. I feel the weight of my own, quiet, undeniable competence. I proved that the steady, boring work is the true foundation of spectacular success. Leo and Victor survived, but they are now permanently tethered to the quiet competence of the man they once dismissed. They need my light now, but they can't look directly at it. I want to know what you think. If the people who broke your confidence finally bowed to your competence, would you choose emotional distance to protect your self-worth, or would you allow them back into your professional life to ensure they never forget your power? Let me know your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.